I didn't. Anyways, let me, without further ado, Sandy lives in Grosse Pointe, right? And is married. His wife's name is Anita, sorry. And they have a young son who's now in college, Jonathan, and a daughter in middle school, and her name is Natasha. So let me welcome and give him a hand for Mr. Sandy Pensler. He's running for the Senate.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys all for being here. I'm a little overdressed. Hold on one second. We're good. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, why I'm running, and what I want to do. I grew up in Detroit on the northwest side, 7 Mile in Livernois, and went away to college. Sky, I also went around, frankly, begging for scholarships as I went off to college. I went to school at Yale, and as you heard, I got my chemical engineering degree and a master's in economics while I was there. I worked my way through Yale. Hopefully you'll have some similar experience. We got awards as freshmen, so I got a better job. I got to work for NASA when I was going through college. Left Yale, started a little company importing sweaters. My girlfriend at the time lived in California, and I went out to see Michigan play in the Rose Bowl. So we went down to Mexico, and we saw these great sweaters, cheap. I started buying them and bringing them up, started a little company, and sold it to pay for law school. I went to law school, came out, worked for a circuit court judge that covered Texas, Louisiana, back then Mississippi, Arkansas. It's the last stop before you get to the Supreme Court. Told my judge I'd love to take a job like yours to be a judge, but seeing they weren't offering anything like that, didn't want to stay in law. And went off and started doing advisory work in New York on Wall Street, advising large companies. And I got pretty good at it and advised Chrysler, GE, Sprint, Time Warner, all their boards of directors on how to position themselves and grow the companies. And as things go, all these companies started coming in, and I went, gee, if I can do it for them, maybe I can do it for myself. So I quit and went off on my own. Not so easy. 4 years I went before making a penny on my own. And I was engaged at the time. It is my wife now, thank goodness. But it was not an easy 4 years. Then a whole bunch of things hit at once, and since then I buy companies now. And what I did was I bought companies that had announced they were shuttering. And the rationale for that was pretty simple. I could get them cheap. And I would go to the banks and say, you know what, you're going to liquidate this. To use a phrase from a commercial, I'll give you $1 plus what you were going to get from the liquidation. We'll keep it open. And in fact, I'll give you 10% more if it works out. And that model worked pretty well. We turned around some companies. And fast forward, been pretty successful economically, have a wonderful family, and I was sitting around the table with my young daughter, and I was griping like crazy about Debbie Stabenow. I was telling her, you know, she's wrong on regulation, she's wrong on taxes, she's nothing but the resistance. And my daughter parroted me back as saying that I always tell her. So what are you going to do about it, Dad? And I looked at my wife and I said, I don't know, hon, is it time? We talked for 2 months as a family about me running for office. I was ready. My family didn't like the idea. My son loved it. My daughter thought it was nuts, and my wife thought it was even nuttier. What do you want to do? Go through that process. But we got there because you talked about fiscal responsibility, And I kept looking at my kids and saying, every time we put on these decisions, it's like nobody understands that we're loading up our kids and our grandkids. And I fundamentally think that every program should have the test, is it worth borrowing from our kids and grandkids? Because that's what we're doing. And most of them don't pass that test. They might be good programs, but do they pass the test of, is it worth borrowing from our kids and grandkids to do them? And unfortunately, because most of them don't pass that test, but we keep doing them. And I thought, you know, I'm kind of a Republican, but Republicans haven't been doing this any better than the Democrats. I got to tell you a quick story. I'm in Washington. I'm sitting in a candidate school. They have those things. They have candidate schools. The Republican Party picks who they think are the likely winners of the primary. They bring them in, and they sit them with some senators and bring out people, and they brief them. And they went through the tax reform, and I would be the only economist in either the House or the Senate, because I taught economics at Yale and at Harvard. And I said, you know, I love this bill, but it's rocket fuel on a hot economy, but it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I think it's great. We got to go for it. And we talked about a bunch of things we could change to drive jobs. Then they started talking about the omnibus budget resolution. And I said, are there no adults in this room? Rand Paul, who happened to come in, taps me on the shoulder and says, can you come outside for a minute? Sure, Senator Paul, no problem. You going to be like this when you get here? And there's nobody really young here, so I can verbatim tell you what I said. Sure as hell hope so. Why the heck would I do this otherwise? He goes, good, I'm going on the floor tonight. I'm going to say we shouldn't vote for this. I can't get more than 3 senators to support me. I said, that's crazy. You know, no bill's better than this bill. A lot of times you have to say no to things. You can't get 3 people. He goes, no, I can get 3. That's how many I can get. I said, well, if I'm there, you have 4. And he goes, I don't know how happy you'll be. This happens a lot here. And I said, but really? I mean, I just sat with our delegation, our congressional delegation. They're bringing a bill tomorrow to the floor to discuss a balanced budget amendment. And he goes, yeah, those same people are voting tonight for the omnibus budget resolution. So it's not just Democrats. It's not just Republicans. It's a real question of whether, as a democracy, we can control ourselves and survive. I fundamentally think it's that important. This deficit issue is that important. I want to talk about Tea Party issues of don't tread on me. I did a little editorial for the Detroit News and got into lengthy, difficult debates with Nolan Finley, who's their editor, who doesn't like the president very much. I do. And what's happened with trade is we've done a ton of bad deals. We have a 25% tariff from China on cars and car parts coming from the U.S. If we want to sell them into China. They have a 2.5% tariff if they want to sell them here. We have a 2.5% tariff from Europe if they want to sell their cars like Mercedes coming in here. They have a 10% tariff on our cars. Who made these deals? Really? Trump is going on, it's like a bull in a china store, and that's what people wanted. He's breaking paradigms. So I think what's so interesting is he's an outsider, he was a business person, and there's this groupthink in Washington. We can't do it differently. And a lot of time that stops breaking things up. That's what I want to go to Washington to change. We got to do things differently, or frankly, when Sky gets out, or worse, when her kids are around, they'll all be saying, yes, President Xi to China. And we can change that. Look, we are living so fortunately in the greatest nation in the history of mankind. It's really true. But we're under a test. When the president calls out people for taking a knee, for example, what are we really saying? We're really saying we're proud of the flag, we're proud of the country, and yes, I'll support their First Amendment rights, but I'll turn off the TV. That's what he's saying. Okay, you don't know how privileged you are, is what he's saying. And these cultural battles, while some people think they may be trivial or whatnot, if we're not proud of our country and what we've done, when we are challenged, as we will be challenged, we're being challenged every day, but we'll be challenged in a more existential way for our existence and way of life. People think we're bad. Why are you going to fight for? So I think these battles are much more meaningful than sometimes the press trivializes. So let me talk to you about what I want to do in the campaign and some specific issues. And then I'll take a lot of questions because, frankly, you do this time and time again and it becomes a little rote. But questions, you can really see how I think. And you'll get to know the issues that you care the most about, too. But one thing I do want to talk about that's an issue of the day is immigration. I spent the day on about 12 different radio stations today talking about immigration. Why is that so important to Michigan, and what do we need to do? Every time an illegal person comes up from the southern border, or the northern border, but most of it's coming from the southern border, costs us about $250,000 net. Again, we've got this huge deficit. People are saying, oh, I want to help them. Da, da, da. We're a nation of immigrants, but we're a nation of laws. They're breaking the laws, and when other immigrants came in, we didn't have these huge support systems. People came through. They worked. We have them now. We can't just let them in willy-nilly. We can't afford it. The president wants some other types of immigrants to come in more broadly. So do I. What are they? Saying we should have more guest workers, not less, because a lot of the farms and tourism needs them, but they should be going home. What do the unskilled workers do besides take up $250,000 that's so terrible? I live right next on the border of Detroit. I grew up in Detroit. A lot of people in Detroit, and throughout the state, but a lot of people in Detroit are on the lower end of the income scale. That's who these unskilled workers end up competing against. And we're having this huge change in the country where we're forcing up jobs. We have the highest labor force participation rate we've had in ages. And it's continuing to grow. What does it mean? An economist says labor force means people that gave up are coming back into the workforce. It means that minorities in Detroit that had given up are getting jobs. I don't want to stop that. I want to keep pulling those people out and into the labor force, and I want to get them off of government aid. Now, some people say my plan, who've read I have a very detailed plan about changing the welfare payments to be a springboard to work rather than handouts for dependency. It's because work provides purpose and meaning in life. It's not just being hard-hearted. It is the unintended consequences of the way we've structured these programs hurts the people it's trying to help. So let me give you an example, and then I'll take questions. I'll go on one or two more issues. We've got 126 means-tested programs. It's welfare-type programs, whether it's energy, housing, you name it. All of them pay you on household income. So what does that do? If you have a two-parent household, you get the same amount as a one-parent household, or less if the two parents make more. So what's happened is the dads have left the households. Why? Because it's a disincentive for dads to stay in the household. So we went from 24% of impoverished kids being born into two-parent households to today in Detroit, it's over 80%. And nationally, it's 74% of impoverished kids are born into single-parent households. Now, I don't know about you, but I had two parents. I was incredibly blessed. And my mom sort of pushed me with one thing. My dad said, take a little more risk. It's okay if you're beat up. You got to fight. You know, they had different messages for me. It was a real blessing. And you can do it with one parent, but it's harder. It's harder, and we are hurting the exact people we're trying to help. Not only are we throwing away good money, getting to that deficit problem, we have the unintended consequences of hurting people we're trying to help. I want to change that. It's a big, big deal. Two last things, I'm just going to say them because I want to get them in. I'm pro-life. I'm sensitive to the issue. I'm also pro-Second Amendment. And what does Second Amendment mean? Again, I went to law school. You see a lot of people protesting that you should take away all the guns. It means if you just say, oh yeah, you can protest and we'll take away the guns, that's not how our Constitution works. There's a mechanism. You can make an amendment. You need 3/4 of the states to approve it. But if you want to change it, you have to work through the constitutional framework. Not going to happen. Okay? Why is it not? Why was that amendment put in? It was put in not for sports purposes and hunting. It's not why it was there. We might like to think that, but it's not. It was there for a constitutional breakdown so that we could form militias to fight against the tyranny of the government. Okay? That's why the Second Amendment was there. It's said by Scalia in the opinion, the latest opinion. So a lot of the solutions that are being offered, people are saying, ignore the Constitution. I got to tell you, I and every other senator and congressman has to take an oath that says, I'm going to protect and defend the Constitution. Well, damn it, read it. So I just want to throw those out. I do want to talk 1 second about how I'm going to beat Debbie and then take questions. Okay? Debbie is the opposite of me in a lot of ways. Not that she's female and I'm male. No. She's a 40-year, 3-year politician. I've never held an elected office. She's never had a private sector job. She doesn't understand that the money has to come from you guys. She thinks these programs are all great and they do nice things, but she doesn't understand that there are two sides. Government can only do something when it takes the money from the people, and she doesn't get that. Yeah, the programs do nice things, but that test that we talked about at the beginning, she doesn't get. So I'll hold her to her record. She's never had to do it. She's been a senator for 18 years. She has 7 bills. 5 of them are building namings. 4, one's a park naming, sorry. So she's got 2 bills that were not just namings in 18 years. It's a disgrace. The state is making a comeback. You see, keep seeing these ads. I hope some of you have seen the ads. I sure hope you have. Michigan First with little kids throwing their hands up. A lot more meaning in that than just Michigan First. First, the whole idea of I will always put the interest of Michiganders in front of partisan politics. Debbie loves Washington more than she loves Michigan. She can't stand the thought of not being there. I don't care. I want the job. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say I don't want the job. I wouldn't have put in. But you know what? If I lose it because I'm doing something that I think is right, I don't need the job. That's the difference. And frankly, I think that's an important difference. It's why we wanted originally to have citizen politicians, and we've gotten away from it. So I could go on and on. I do this a lot. I could go on and on. I'd rather take questions from you guys, and hopefully I can get out some of the other themes and thoughts and answer some of the concerns you guys have. So, any questions? Shoot.
And because she's on the Ag Committee, she gathers a lot of support. How do you break that hold?
So the question is, how do you break Debbie's hold on the Farm Committee? She is currently the ranking member of the Farm Committee. She used to be the chairperson of the Farm Committee. The Farm Bureau is a little afraid of her, right? She was a powerful force on the Farm Bill, and a lot of the Farm Bill goes under the radar. The SNAP, a lot of the handouts that go in the Farm Bill are under the radar. How do you break it? Farmers are entrepreneurs. They're small business entrepreneurs. Will they take handouts if they can get them? You bet. But the American farmer is the most efficient farmer in the world. And what they want more than the handouts is open markets. So, again, let's look around the world, and it's these antiquated trade deals. Europe taxes our fruits at 17% tariffs. They have quotas on milk. They have quotas on all the dairy products. The number of tariffs and limitations on Farm Bill are incredible on farmers' products. We don't do the same to their products. So we need to open up that European market. We have a deficit in ag goods with Europe, the highest cost producers in the world. So it's crazy. Go over to China. We have a surplus with China in ag, but they tax our beef at 35%. They tax our pork. On the grains, they go up and down on grains depending on what their yearly yields are. We do not have open markets. And in Japan, so again, I'm using the countries that are hotspots now because it's worse with cars, the imbalance and the stuff. The trade deals are incredibly biased against the United States. Trump's breaking those. Will there be a little pain in the process? I believe there will be, by the way. But we'll get it right. And we'll open up those markets for farmers. And that's what they really want. I mean, even when President Xi's first salvo was, well, we'll buy more ag crops from you, more soybeans, more pork products. They backed off it, but we'll get there. And I think that's really the appeal to farmers is open up markets, let us compete, and that's how you appeal to the farmers.
Follow-up to that, how do you appease these farmers, the American farmer now? They're going to be the first ones. They're going to be subject to the tariff things right now. Would you not agree with that?
I'm not sure how this is going to play out. It's a negotiation. Couple of facts that are helpful. So let's take China. China, we buy last year, 506 billion of their products. They buy 130 billion of ours. So if we get for a tit for tat in trade war, who loses? Nah, they lose. They lose. And they don't want to do that. They're not going to give away their advantages without a little bit of grunting and fighting. But I think if we show we're just not going to run for the hill at the first push, I think we'll do just fine, and I don't think we'll get in a trade war. We might have a little tit for tat for a while. I don't think it's going to last a year. I don't think it'll last even through the election. So I think the key is not to get stampeded by fear. By fear. To understand the facts and not get stampeded by fear.
How would you tax people? And what I mean is, how would you look at the fair way to tax people and how everyone pays their fair share?
Fair share. Fair share means different things to different people. So I think what the steps that we just took in the tax bill were appropriate steps. We lowered corporate rates to make us competitive worldwide. We lowered the top-end tier to levels that people stopped using shelters to the same degree that they had been using them. And most importantly, from my perspective, is we really incentivized companies to invest in the United States rather than investing abroad. So I think we did a lot of the good things there. I'd love to say I'm going to lower your taxes more. And maybe 10 years out, that's what we'll be doing. I don't see that in the short term. We got too big a deficit. But I think the steps that we did were appropriate steps, and they're going to drive a ton of growth into the general economy. So I probably don't put another reform of the tax code at the top of my list.
Mr. Pensler, just a quick question on the taxes there. You know, people who are working pay a certain percentage that they do, but when you go for capital gains, it's a lot lower. Should those be, do you have any opinion as to whether or not those should be equal? I mean, you're an ex-investment banker.
Yeah, I do.
You made a lot of money on capital gains in your past, I'm assuming.
Not that much on capital gains. Most of my stuff's flow through vehicles, so it's ordinary income. So I do have one revenue increasing idea that, in fact, I've talked about on the stump, and it probably hurts me with fundraising. There's a provision that some people call the billionaire's deduction. And most people in Michigan don't hear about it very often because there aren't a lot of private equity funds in Michigan. There are in New York and California and Chicago. What it is a typical structure is you get all these institutions to put in money. You go buy companies. And the profits, you get 20% of the profits. So you didn't put in the money. Somebody else's money is in, but you're getting 20% of the profits. That's treated as capital gains. It's called the carried interest deduction. It's a billionaire's credit. And it goes not to Michigan. There are only 2 or 3 private equity funds that are of meaningful size in Michigan. That should go away. And those things should be taxed at ordinary income. It's about $12 billion a year. Meaningful. Doesn't solve the problem, but it's a start. And yes, I'd want to eliminate that.
Sandy, I have a question. A few months ago, you have a primary opponent. He was here in this same room. And he gave a real good speech. Everybody seemed to be pretty receptive to him. You guys are a lot alike in a number of ways. Okay. But the one thing that I've noticed is your ads are talking about him and something about somehow he's involved supporting sanctuary cities. Mm-hmm. And I would really like to get some detail on that to help me understand.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. John and I aren't alike. John's a good guy, and I'd say he's a charismatic speaker. His only political donation was to Raquel Lopez. Only political donation prior to running was to Raquel Lopez. Raquel Lopez supports it's her platform is to make Detroit a sanctuary city. That is her platform. That is his only political donation. His family has lots of political donations. They donated to Debbie Stabenow. They donated to the Levins. They're a very strong Democratic donating family. His only donation was to Raquel Lopez. And this was not a side platform for Raquel. This is her fundamental platform to make Detroit a sanctuary city. And that is his only political donations. None to Republicans. That is his only political donation. His business background is not at all like mine. He says he's grown this great business. When he came into the business, he was at the business a year and a half out of business school had his dad's business before he started to run. He claims he grew it from 35 million to 135 million. When he joined, it was at 110 million. So John's a dynamic speaker. Thank you for his, I'd say to him, as I have, thank you for your military service. The rest of the stuff, no. So that's why I say I don't like thinking that we're similar.
Oh, I was going to ask a question.
Oh.
So two healthcare questions, I guess. So the
Yeah.
Democrats passed Obamacare, and costs have been skyrocketing. One of the things I'm wondering what your thoughts are is if it wouldn't make more sense to have more a la carte type care. In other words, I'm a man, I'm 65 years old almost. Why should I have to pay for maternity care? Things like that. So that's one thing. Another thing is drug prices. Drug prices have been skyrocketing. Do you think that it would be better if, the Democrats seem to want to maybe like do some price fixing, lower prices? Do you think it's better if the more of a free market approach to drug prices versus fixing prices on drugs?
Okay. So, again, I'll try to keep it short, but it's hard. Healthcare is 18% of our total economy. It is twice the industrial world's average. The next closest countries are Sweden and Denmark at 11%. There's a study done by the industrial companies called OECD. It says our healthcare is okay in the U.S., but not meaningfully better than any of the top 10 OECD companies. Countries. We're right in the middle. So what can we do differently? This is what drives the deficit more than anything else, is healthcare costs. So did Obamacare fix it? No, it didn't. It made it worse. So first of all, you got to get rid of it. Didn't work. Okay? Didn't work. You got to have market mechanisms, which we do not have. So consumers, if you want to go save money, and you want to put it, like I wanted to put it in my companies, all health savings accounts, can't do it. So that people could save if they didn't invest it. You have to have an insurance plan that qualifies, and then you can put the health savings account on top. So there's no incentive for the consumers to go out and save and shop around, or for the producers. So we need market incentives across the board. Prescription drugs are wildly high. We subsidize the rest of the world by paying the high prices to the developers and let Canada and Europe piggyback off of us paying the high prices, which is crazy. And then there's another issue, which it's hard. And this is, look, I'm older, and most of the people in the room are older. Over half healthcare costs the last 6 months of life. And we don't want to talk about it. We want to push it aside. And when my mom and dad died, in both cases, they came to me and said, we could do this, but it's not going to help. They might last another year. Do it. We can do this. Do it. I didn't have those discussions with them before they got terribly sick. I think that's a mistake. We need to have dignity in the process and talk about that instead of hiding from it. And I think that'll lower healthcare costs. I really do. I think just talking about it and saying, it's a really good idea to have a living will. Here are a few examples that are out there. Maybe even give an incentive if you have one. Make sure you think about it. It's another problem that we have in our democracy of not dealing with tough problems.
And 0% insurance?
No, so what we wanted to do, it's a little more complicated. We wanted to buy catastrophic caps. And we pay now it's $11,500 per employee in healthcare. And we wanted to buy caps, and we could buy catastrophic caps for about $2,000 a person. And then we were going to have health savings accounts for the rest, and they could manage them. They'd have the catastrophic cap. I don't remember what the cap is. It's probably like $40,000, $50,000 before it cuts in. So if they got it the first year, they're a loser. If they got it 4 or 5 years in, they're better. Yeah.
What do you mean by cap, though? I mean, you weren't capping the amount that you were paying.
No. So you can buy effectively an insurance policy that says over a certain, you have to pay the first X dollars, and after that, the insurance company picks it up. But that wasn't an option. That's what we tried to do, but we couldn't get it done. But yes, I did want to do that. We brought everyone in. I had about a series of 10 meetings, and then I went off and tried to see if we could do it, and we were told you can't do it. So.
I want to apologize for being a little bit late, but I'm going to ask you this general question.
Sure.
Because I might have missed something. Is there anything significant in Trump's platform, the Republican platform that he's embraced, that he's trying to implement, that you have differences with? Maybe you can explain.
Yeah, Great Lake Restoration Initiative. Look, everyone in Michigan loves the Great Lakes. I almost say, if not everybody, they should. It's part of why you're in Michigan, is you love the Great Lakes, you love the streams. He was going to cut that. When he announced the cut in his budget, I went with the Republican delegation. We all went over and said, bad idea. Don't cut this. Now, I had a very different approach than Debbie. So he goes, you got to cut somewhere about, I said, look, we're all behind you you backed out on the Paris Climate Accords. Paris Climate Accords had billions going from Michiganders to China and India to solve their problem. So let's use those dollars right here in Michigan. Let's use those to solve our Great Lakes problems. Let's create parks going up along the Great Lakes. But yeah, I didn't want him to cut that program. And they didn't. He rolled it back. But again, if you're saying no to everything, which is Debbie's position, the resistance, right? No to everything. You said no 50 times, and when something comes up like this, you say, I know I said no to everything else, but this one time I really mean it. This is really bad. You're not taken seriously. So when the Michigan Republican delegation went to the White House as a group and said, look, we don't want you to cut this, that had some teeth and traction, and it got put back in the budget. But that's one thing I differed with them on.
Agreement between Mexico and Canada that we're involved in right now. What's your stance on that?
On NAFTA?
NAFTA.
So NAFTA is critical to Michigan's economy. 60% of Canadian trade runs through Michigan. So we don't want to block it out. Having said that, can we improve it? You bet. Milk products, quotas, huge tariffs. Our poultry, quotas, huge tariffs. Our softwood lumber can't even compete coming across because they give them the land for the softwood lumber for their western producers. So they give those things and say we're just protecting our industry, but if we want to protect our industry, it's protectionist. Sorry, we got to get those things straight. Mexico, it's worse. So in Mexico, well, stay in Canada first. Canada has an agreement to pay 2% of its GDP on defense through NATO. They pay 1%. We pay 3%. The difference is $1,000 per person. So we give Canada this incredible umbrella of defense that, again, we pay for, and then they stick their finger in our eyes with those other programs. Mexico, huge trade imbalance. And again, we're giving them, through the free trade agreement, access to our markets for free. So what's happened is Ford's moving its small cars all down to Mexico. Why? First, there's a labor arbitrage. That's a small part of it. The big part of it, there are two components. One is they can bring in all these parts from China and Mexico and put them into the car without having any tariffs whatsoever. Two, they can sell them around the world back to Europe that has a 10% tariff on us. It has a 0 tariff on Mexico. So Mexico, in fact, has free trade agreements with 60% of the world. We have 14%. He wants to say, look, you want to take advantage of the free trade agreement? We need a certain amount of American content in the car. That's good, I think, to start. Second, let's get most favored nations. So if Mexico has all these free trade agreements, we get to take advantage of them too, so that the product doesn't just flow down and production doesn't flow to Mexico. So it's like 101 economics, really. Maybe sophomore year economics, not 101. And we just have bad deals, and he's changing them. So do we need NAFTA? We need a broad agreement with Canada, more than with Mexico, so they're a little different. But we're being taken advantage of, and we got to fix it. You know, I think it's advantageous to both parties, but it needs to be updated.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here tonight. Two things. First off, up until this all came about, I think a lot of people like myself, you think North American Free Trade Agreement, free, you don't think there's tariffs. You don't think there's anything. You think it's, I'll sell to you, you sell to me, whatever the price is. So what you're saying is in a lot of these free trade deals, they're not free of tariffs, they're not free of quotas. So when I would expect that when we make a deal, if we're going to have, you know, open trade, it means exactly that, open trade. So I can certainly understand that. This group's been around, like so many others, since 2009. And with the 2010 sweeps into when we started changing things, we've elected a lot of people to go into the Congress, into the House and into the Senate. Unfortunately, a large number of the people that we put there that said they're going to be rock solid, well, not so solid, and a lot of them not even there anymore. Your position, I mean, what can you say as far as your stance that you are going to hold firm to these beliefs and not lose them? Now, a question I had: are you your campaign? Do you have campaign donations? Are you self-funding? I'm not familiar enough with your campaign of how you're funding, because I know it's expensive, especially U.S. Senate. I don't know, $7 million, $8 million. I don't know what they figure the cost is for a seat like that, but. I guess if you could just speak to those, like I said, first off, how are you going to stay true, and then your campaign, how are you going to get to the finish line? Because once you win a primary, then there's huge costs, and she's got a lot of money in the bank.
She does. Another major difference between me and my opponent. We both claim to be successful business people. I put $5 million of my own money into the campaign. I will put more in. John's put $50,000 of his own money in as a loan. We're just different. It's going to take a lot to beat Debbie. I will be wildly outspent unless I raise a lot more money. Plenty to get through the primary. It's not the issue. The general, Debbie has never been challenged before. Pete Hoekstra and Mike Bouchard were both reasonable candidates. They really were. But they just got swamped. Mike had $1.5 million going into the general, and Pete had $2.5 million. She had 14 and 12 in those races. So what happened? She never debated him on a statewide network. She avoided the issues, and she ran the ads. And she keeps saying, I have all these bills. On her website, she's got 16 bills that she's authored. Go look on her website. I've authored this. I've authored that. Problem is, none of them have been voted on them, none of her legislation. Makes it sound like she did all this stuff, but they're not legislation. She authored the bills. So my daughter, who's 14, came home from school because her teacher showed her all these bills that the senator had authored. And I said, "Hun, what's your favorite topic?" And she goes, "Well, Dad, I think this drug problem's terrible." I said, "Good, let's go write a little bill. You'll have authored the bill that has a better chance to become legislation than all those bills that you saw on her website." So how do we do it? One, I also am fortunate. The business contacts that I advised and have all said, "Look, win the primary, come talk to us." Now, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. They don't like that idea of having the taxes go on those private equity investments. They're the largest private equity. I was the third person at the largest private equity firm in the world. You don't like that. But you get through stuff. You get through stuff. How do you stay true? Biggest issue. I can't guarantee you shit, right? I can't. Talk's cheap. All I can tell you is I don't need the job. I'm doing this to change things. I'm going there to shake things up and to change it. I don't want my whole career to be in politics. I'm too old. And I get it all the time. Look, there are a lot of special interests out there that say, do this, do that, we'll endorse you. And my reaction always, they typically go too far. And I'll go, I'll do this, but I won't go over here. And that's probably not the best thing to get elected, but it'll work. We'll get our message out. And it is, once you're in the governing role, you have to be able to say no. And frankly, the fact that I self-fund it helps. You know, one, I don't need your money. Two, I'm happy to listen to you or anyone else that has insights. But if I don't like it, I'll just say no.
I just want to follow up for a second because I want to clarify what you said. You said something about, you know, and it's true. I think it's something like 60% of healthcare costs are in the last year of life. So I wasn't quite, pardon?
Last 6 months.
Okay, 6 months, sorry. So I wasn't quite sure. It sounded like you were proposing a death panel. Like you were.
Yeah, so let me be very clear. There's an idea here. There's a theory of choice in economics. It's the big new hot thing. And so one of my colleagues at Yale had a very interesting idea, I thought. He said, look, gee, this would be pretty good. We can have 5 alternatives for living wills. One is you write your own.
So would you make it that a requirement that people
No,
have?
let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish. 2 was one that's very scanty, right? That you have you don't get a lot. They pull the plug pretty quickly. And then the other 3 were all different machinations, right? And I said, well, gee, that's not the unit. He goes, well, look, we can even incentivize people to pick. But we need people to do stuff. We need them to pick. And I'm not sure that's the right process. I'm not. But I think we have to start talking about it. And we have to start talking about what is the right process, not just saying we should spend more in the last week. But, yeah, I don't think it's a government panel that's got to say this is good, this is bad. I think it's people that have to say this. I think it's people that have to decide what they want. But they have to think about it.
Okay, my question is, I guess, is that a requirement that you would try to put in place, or is that, I mean, would you require people to have one of those choices?
I don't have my idea of what it is other than to talk about it yet. His idea was you got an incentive for picking one of the choices. And you opted into one thing automatically if you chose nothing. I don't know if that's the right thing or not. But I know we got to start talking about this and start coming to ways to handle it, rather than just saying, we're not going to talk about it. We're just not going to talk about it. We're going to keep spending more in that last period and trying that last week is where we keep pouring money in, because it's actually, the curve isn't just the 6 months, it's more and more in the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We got to talk about it. We got to talk about what's right. We got to give dignity to people, too, by talking about it. Tell me what specific, be a little more specific.
The life at conception bills that are being talked about as far as the pro-life possibilities and being able to legislatively overturn Roe v. Wade based on the life at conception.
It's not possible. So people don't want to hear it, but Supreme Court's the law of the land. So it overrides any legislative bill that you're going to pass. So if you want to change the definition of when conception is and what the realities are of abortion rights, you got to change the court. You can't legislate. There are things you can do to legislate. So the way the court has it, I think there's lots of room to push when you can have conception, when you could have abortions, what notices have to be given. There's lots of rooms to change things, but to say it's at conception would be against Roe and that whole line of decisions. So there's the way you have to do that's different. I would not, and this might not make people happy here, use a litmus of any one issue for a Supreme Court judge, because I don't think they'd pass. What I would do is say, you better believe in the intention at the time things were written is the guiding principle. So, how does that affect specifically your question of right to life and abortion issues? Stay with me a minute. It's a little long, but stay with me. Abortions were certainly known at the time of the drafting of the Constitution. They were known way before that. There were disputes about abortions at the time of the drafting. There was nothing put in the Constitution other than the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment in the Constitution says all rights not herein enumerated abide at the state. And the people, it says at the end, abide at the state and the people. Well, they overrode the 10th Amendment in the Roe decision and said, we find in the right of search and seizure, which then went to privacy, we find a right of abortion. It's crazy. I mean, the mental exercise that had to go to unreasonable search and seizure to the right of abortion, this is legislation by 5 people. The majority of the court, there are 9 on the court. I think that's tyranny. That was not meant to be how you change the Constitution. Again, there's a mechanism for changing Constitution. It's not supposed to be by 5 people saying, we don't like this, we're going to change it. So I think what you have to do to change it is have a conservative judges. You have to have judges that say, that's not in the Constitution, what are you talking about? So if you want to change to a pro-life view, you have to change the court. And I would work very hard. So a couple things on life. You should defund Planned Parenthood, and you should have conservative judges. You need to defund Planned Parenthood, and you need conservative judges. Conservative judges' fundamental tenet is, I'm not a legislator. I'm appointed to judge and rule on the law as the legislature wrote it. And that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. I don't think you can do it just by a simple bill. I don't think it would hold up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Pensler.
Last thing.
I was going to say.
Ending statement. The Constitution's last sentence, not the Constitution, sorry, Declaration of Independence, last sentence, okay? It says, we mutually pledge our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor, okay? Think about it for a second. Think of how powerful that is. They knew their lives were at danger, and they put that all on the line by signing. Their fortunes was really second, and what they meant, I think, was their families, because then you passed it on, and most of them were pretty darn rich. And then their sacred honor was the most important. They mutually pledged that. You guys, by being here, are kind of renewing that pledge and being engaged in the process. So I got to thank you for what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, think of it in terms of that pledge. Not enough. Do more. Get more excited. Do even more. Because otherwise, what we're going to see, the Democrats are fired up. They are fired up, and they're going to show up at the polls. They're fired up about low employment. They're fired up about having pride in the country. They're fired up about a whole bunch of things. I don't exactly know what they're fired up about, but they're fired up. And I don't want to wake up and see Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, Chuck Schumer as the head of the Senate, and Donald Trump being impeached. But that's what's at stake in this election. And it really matters that you guys, you're out here, you care. Fantastic. Thank you. Care even more. Whatever you're doing, do a little more of it. Thank you for doing what you do, because most people don't. They sit on the sidelines. So thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. Okay, thank you. We happen to have another guest with us tonight, and I'm going to let him talk for a little bit. His name is Earl, and Earl is running for governor, probably. So let's welcome Earl up here, please.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for having me. It was kind of short notice to the committee of coming up here and speaking, so tell you a little bit about me. I'm not a career politician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an attorney, and at times I'm not politically correct either. What I am is coming from the middle class. I was sitting in chairs like you are right now, and I decided to do a little bit more. So I'm running for governor, simply because I wasn't happy with who's running. Right now I'm not on the ballot. We're hoping to remedy that problem within the next week or two. A little bit about me and my background. I have an automotive and diesel mechanics degree from Lincoln Technical Institute in Indianapolis, Indiana. My work background goes from mechanics to truck driver to heavy equipment, working in the oil field in Kalkaska. When that slowed down, I came back downstate. I've had 2 successful businesses myself. I was a firefighter and rescue for 8 years in Oxford. I've done quite a few different things throughout my career, and one of the reasons I think it's running for governor like that is not being a career politician. I'm not tunnel visioned. Throughout my career, I've had a diversified career to see what the people of the state of Michigan and from different areas of the state of Michigan need and want. The next guy in line, Dr. Jim Hines, he's a doctor. Now, I like Jim and I like his wife Martha. They're great people. But being a doctor is tunnel vision. You've got to be focused your whole career. Now he's branching out into politics. I'm not so sure that he understands. What does the mechanic need? What does the truck driver need? The heavy equipment operator? What does the firefighter need and want? Those are the things that I can answer because I've been there, done that. I've worked my whole life in blue jeans. Right now I'm setting down the wrenches and I'm picking up a pen. One of the other jobs I had was at General Motors. That's where I retired from. I took my training as a firefighter to General Motors and set up a first responder program in the plant. I was a team leader when I retired. One of the things I'm most proud of there was my team of 30 people. We had the lowest absenteeism rate in the whole plant of 4,500 people. I contributed that to one thing: respect. Treat your people with respect. They'll work for you, and they will work with you. And my people did. That's how come we got where we were at. I want to take that type of working with people and getting them to work together through respect to Lansing. Some of the topics I'd like to go over, well, let's start with water. A lot of people, when you mention water in Michigan, they think of Flint. Well, Flint was a disaster. I think they should have tapped into the disaster fund. We've got $23 billion in that fund to help those people out and get things started a lot sooner. They didn't even tap into it. But what a lot of people don't understand is in Detroit, Lansing, Kalamazoo, even as far as Alpena, the lead levels are higher than Flint's. People only know about Flint because it was in national news. This is a statewide problem. Flint was just the tip of the iceberg. It's part of our infrastructure problem that has not been touched for years, and we've got to do something about it soon. Like Mr. Pensler said, or we're going to hand this off to our kids and our grandkids. Well, the previous generations are handing this to us, so we've got to do something. He was talking about the Great Lakes. I'm a big proponent there of saving the Great Lakes. 23 billion gallons of raw sewage is being dumped into our freshwater system every year. This is why last year in July alone, down in St. Clair, they had to shut the beaches down 3 times because of high E. coli. And every time it was right after a heavy rain. Now this can be prevented. And people are going to say, well, how are you going to do that? That's going to cost a ton of money. Not necessarily. Because some of the cities around the water areas are taking this upon themselves. Port Huron is a great example. Some of the problem that we have is our water, our sewage and our drainage are combined. We have a heavy rain, and it goes into the overflow, into the holding ponds, and it overflows. Port Huron separated the two. They don't have that problem anymore. There are a lot of small cities around the state that have done exactly that. But we need to do it all over the state and stop poisoning our drinking water. Now, in certain areas like Flint, they're going through the process of changing out the lead lines. This is an antiquated system that we're drinking our water from. Those lines have to be replaced everywhere. So we've got to start doing that now. And unfortunately, this should have been started 10 years or more ago. This is one reason I'm running. If nothing changes, nothing changes. The top 3 guys that are running for governor are all career politicians. And they're really not making any moves towards changing anything. And this is what I want to do, is change things. So I'm coming out of the middle class like you folks to try and actually go to Lansing and make a change. We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to wrap it up with that. My cards are on the table out in the hall. Some of you have picked them up. Thank you. There's pens out there if you want them. If you want to read more of what I've got, what I want to do, I'd appreciate it. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks,